And what I liked about the way the data lined up was that I would get a really juicy set that yielded manifestations, and I could say, oh, yes, our predictions came out. So I had a data set that forecast the Scott Peterson trial being emptied by an earthquake, as well as the Sumatran tsunami. And we forecast that stuff 9 months ahead of Sumatran tsunami. I had the 300,000 people killed, nation driven back to a previous age, all of that stuff. It was just a beautiful set. That was part of a larger set called the Global Coastal Event. The Global Coastal Event has within it a descriptor set, context, that seems to describe the Pacific plate cracking. So from my viewpoint, within my data, independent of anything else, I'd always settled on the idea that whatever was going to happen would result in the Pacific plate cracking, whether it was the expansion of the planet as a natural process, which it is true, planets expand, they grow, or whether it was some kind of an impact. I couldn't tell from my data, but it kind of didn't matter to me, right?
Right, and?
Because basically what's going to happen is that if the Pacific plate cracks as our data suggested, it was going to create a global coastal event. The global coastal event, since most of humanity lives around the coast and most of our infrastructure is around the coast, and all of our trade is dependent upon the water, was going to basically knock the whole humanity back to a previous age. I did not realize the full extent of what might be possible in terms of how far back we might be knocked until I had gotten out of my data set examination and actually encountered certain things in the real world. Like, just because I opened up my big mouth repeatedly and talked to nice guys like Art and so on, I ended up getting famous, and people would call me and tell me things. And I didn't ask them to, and a lot of it was BS, but some of it was good stuff. And some of the people that have called and told me things, it tends to support the viewpoint that there's going to be some kind of an impact from space, whether it's ejecta from the sun, whether it's meteors. It doesn't really seem to matter. The net result is going to be a great big whoomp. Nature's going to open up a can of whoomp ass, and we're the goal of it all. We're the target. It's going to do this over a course of 3 waves, according to the common consensus view within the dot mill world, and that the first of these waves will hit us after December, and everybody's really spookily worried as to, or curious as to how the Mayans might have known. There's a lot of discussion about that. But, and it's going to be very, very nasty, and it is, in essence, what has driven them to take the mythical monies that Nasara and Drake and all these people think is out there, and convert that mythical wealth into those deep underground bunkers. Everybody thinks there's $35 trillion stashed around the planet, that kind of thing. No, I'm sorry, it's been converted to actual wealth in terms of solid material, and it's been shoved underground to support these people for their next couple of generations. You were talking earlier about the circadian rhythms, the clocks in the body, this kind of thing, and how they do it with neurolinguistic programming and the tones and the mind control. I've read hundreds of studies. I invented the software that allowed me to read very fast from computers, up to 2,000 words a minute. So I would find anything and everything I could read and just read it. And so I read for years while I was working on the other projects. In any event, I read a lot of these studies about how the military was shoving people down into the ground. And they would do it with college students, they'd do it with military soldiers, they would do it as couples, they would do it as groups, they would do it individually. And they just kept doing this for years. And the way in which the studies were written, the goal was never really clearly stated. There were all these intermediate goals to find out this, that, or about the circadian rhythm, but basically the question was why. And what really had them flummoxed for a number of years was they found out that the female's body clock shuts down ovation after 47 days underground. And it really had the military worried. And that's when, this was in maybe 98 that I first came across this study, and that's when I started thinking, these guys are planning on having to go underground for a long time if they want to be able to breed underground, and that's got them so worried that they're spending millions of dollars in this time period to research this. So they've known easily since the 60s.
Well, it's kind of just disconcerting when you think, exactly what you're describing from a very, very cold scientific point of view is, if I remember my Bible correctly, Revelation 8:1 about the seventh seal and the When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. The seven angels, once again, it talks about the seven angels, and seven trumpets were given to them, and the star named Wormwood, which is a kind of bitter poison, crashes into the earth. All of these things you're talking about in the very cold light of clinical day seem to all be predicted for us. Just to go through this just briefly, just to take a look at, since we're all in the book of Revelation now, it seems, what you're talking about seems to be, once again, the seventh seal, silence in heaven for half an hour, and there's all these interpretations about what that might mean. Then it talks about how the seven angels and seven trumpets are then given to those seven angels, and then Revelation 8, 3 through 5 says that another angel came and... Now, supposedly they interpret this angel as Christ himself, who alone is in control of events, but that's not what it says. And he talks about a golden censer, and then 8:6 says that this angel made things ready. He commissions the seven archangels to blow their trumpets. And then 8:7 talks about the first trumpet. Hail and fire mixed with blood are thrown upon the earth. Well, there you go. That's solar ejecta and the sun. A third of the earth and its trees and all green grass were burned up. And this first judgment corresponds to the seventh plague inflicted upon Egypt. However, certainly an electromagnetic pulse from the sun, which would precede a solar ejecta, would probably shut everybody up or burn or take down all the satellites. Revelation 8 through 9 talks about the second trumpet that affects the sea as the first affected the land, and it corresponds to the first plague inflicted on Egypt, and volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, hurricanes, shipwrecks. This doesn't have to happen all at once, by the way. It could happen over a period of time, but the waters, like the land, will not always yield its Edenic qualities. Yes, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say that, yeah, it's well, you bring up the Bible. It's a whole issue. I mean, I'm not a Christian. I've got all these issues against the religion and so on. But nonetheless, the encoding involved in all of that is replicated in so many places. Like if you go and look at the Sanskrit, you know, the Hindu literature is not given over to prophecy, but what they do have suggests that this is a periodic kind of an event. And if you look at the few codices that came out of the Mayans that actually survived the snatching by the Vatican, they didn't burn them, they took them back to the Vatican. But I happened to be in Europe in the 60s, and I actually saw the Dresden Codex as well as the now disappeared Madrid Codex.
Oh.
Okay, both of which, because I was always hauled around all these damn museums when I was a kid, it didn't really interest me at the time, but the Dresden Codex talks about the flood dragons that come on in and bathe the planet with water, right?
Right.
Well, get this. We happen to be getting into a situation where if you go back and you look at the Bible, but also the precursors to that in terms of other literature that talks about floods and the idea of flooding from space, right? Or from the sky, 40 days of rain, that kind of thing. And then we look at the recent movie of the blue guys, I can't think of the name of it at the moment, where they had the water up above the planet, you know?
Not Avatar?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't seen the film, but I was told this. In any event, though, here's the
You mean the floating islands, the unobtainium, the islands that floated around?
No, I have not seen the film. I was told that there was also a floating water, so floating sea.
No, but
maybe that was okay. That's inaccurate. But in any event, though, here's the deal: our sun is transiting and rapidly approaching an area of space that we've known for years is not like the rest of interstellar media. We know that this is the case because there's a particular star out there that is surrounded by hot water, and the scientists don't know why it is surrounded by hot water, but that hot water vapor bubble around it is approaching us at several million miles an hour, and we're approaching it at that same level of speed. So the idea of the 40 days of rain, the idea of a global flood, it makes sense if you view things from a different perspective relative to how the Earth is is not rotating around the sun, and that's another issue. We don't rotate around the equatorial belt of the sun. That's a myth. All of our astrology is based on that, but if you actually examine the math involved and the light involved, we could never ever see a retrograde planet. We could never see most of the outer planets ever, except for a brief period of time. We would only have a 33-degree view of any outer planet, yet we can see them constantly. And so the only model that makes sense is the Dr. Bott model, from which I think Nassim Haramein has adapted some of his thinking. But this is that we're helical. Okay, we don't rotate around the middle of the sun. We follow the sun and rotate around inside its cometary mass, if you will.
Huh.
Okay, and so here's our problem. When NASA goes and they shoot off something to sample space, they're sampling space around Earth that is in the vacuum behind the sun, shoving itself through this interstellar medium at a vast, huge rate of speed, so fast that it creates all this friction, causing all the heat from the sun. So, we need not postulate a second star that they can't find. We need not postulate Nibiru or Planet X or any of that. There are plenty of media within the actual physics we're encountering to explain all the effects that are occurring right now. In fact, you can imagine it this way. If we're all debris following behind the sun and it's like a comet and it's dragging us in its coma, in its tail, then a lot of stuff makes sense. In other words, if the sun were getting into a denser media of space, that coma behind it might shrink and collapse in on itself a little tiny bit, and thus alter the relationship among all of the planets relative to the sun, thus giving us more and different sun patterns and different heat patterns without altering our apparent relationship to the fixed stars, because it's not going to change our angle of tilt. Make any sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay, because of that, here's a few things that naturally follow from this line of thinking. If we're being drugged behind the sun like it's a comet, then we're in essence a little tiny comet behind another bigger comet within this vacuum. But it doesn't mean that the vacuum exists on the other side of the sun. In fact, quite opposite. The interstellar media is probably quite thick relative to this kind of thing, and we cannot ever shove anything out into it because we don't have enough energy. And thus we find that the Voyager spacecraft are not leaving our solar system because they're running into stuff that we are not prepared for, which is a kind of solid matter, because we thought that all of space was a vacuum. It is not. Some other things naturally follow as well. And that is that if we're a comet following behind another comet, then any debris that wants to hit us has to catch up with us. It also follows that our moon does not actually rotate around the middle of our planet, which is true. It rotates around in this weird spiral pattern that appears to mimic the, as though it goes around our equator. And this accounts for the fact that almost all the meteor strikes on our Earth are from the equatorial bulge, the northernmost area of the equatorial bulge, southward, okay, because basically the South Pole is the part of us that is further away from the sun. And so anything that's going to come and try and chase us and catch us is going to, more likely than not, impact us on the southern hemisphere than the northern hemisphere. It also means that certain gravitational influences are going to be predominant, and thus force things like most of the mass of the planet, absent the water, should be in the northern hemisphere, according to this model, simply because of the way that gravity is going to affect and try and pull the matter through space. And we find that indeed all of these things are true. Thus, when I became exposed to the farsight.org and Courtney Brown's remote viewing showing this particular devastating result, totally unexpected, from an experiment that was just so elegantly designed that I stood up and paid attention when I heard the details of it. It was just a beautiful piece of thinking. I mean, pristine, clear, elegant, as I say, just elegant. You know, to hell with the results. The experiment was just glorious just to envision. But then the results come back as this huge, devastating, unexpected disaster. And because of the way that they had done their experiment, they have actually sort of validated that whatever is going to come in and probably hit us on the southern hemisphere. This kind of validates my work, which showed that we were going to get a Pacific plate crack that would go from about the middle of the equatorial bulge towards the south, towards Chile, which of course would fit with some kind of a southern hemisphere impact. Now, it doesn't mean any of this stuff is going to happen, but what is curious about all of this is that you've got all these weird coincidences, if you will, and conspiracy nuts out there like myself putting all this stuff together and putting all our little blocks and building our little forts and stuff. And, the powers that be are reacting and doing things exactly as though they would if they also thought this.
Huh. Okay. Wow. And they're obviously not telling us about it. I mean, again, the very disturbing things that I'm getting here are everything from Obama's not leaving, and it doesn't matter what the election is, he'll find a way to kind of.
Yeah, but they've been saying that crud forever. And what's the difference between Obama and Willard?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I try to point out to people. I said, "Don't you get it? The election itself is the conspiracy. Don't you understand?"
Correct. Yeah,
you know,
that's
they've gone
the
to
game.
all this trouble to put the two sock puppets in place so that they own both the horses.